Welcome to the Code with Jason meetup. We're supposed to have a mentee today, but he is not here. So what are we going to do instead? I don't know. We're going to make it up as we go, but we have a pretty good turnout tonight. Why don't we do this for starters? We can go clockwise through everybody and we can just do quick intros. Maybe you can say your name and where you live. James, you want to kick us off?
Sure. James Kubal. I used to work at Yahoo. Recently let go after 20 years. Honestly, came as a complete relief to me. And now I'm just kind of chilling out for a little while, doing stuff around the house, a lot of projects that I've been putting off. But anyway, I live in Southern California in a small town called Temecula, which is inland about 40 miles, I would say, maybe between San Diego and LA. That's me.
Awesome. Um, Rick.
Yeah, my name is Rick Smoke. I live in Stockbridge, Michigan, which is kind of like right in the middle of the state. I know what you mean by flat, flat, and more flat, because that's kind of where I'm at. I work for the University of Michigan as a software developer. I've been doing that since 2014. So,
And you've been involved with the university for much going back way further than that, right?
yeah, I've been there since 91. I started out doing small animal surgeries at the dental school for research.
It's the typical career pipeline. You start off doing surgeries on mice, and then you get into software. We've all done it. Um, but no, I interrupted you. You started doing small animal surgery, and then at some point transitioned to software.
I did. Well, I ended up setting up, it was before computers existed back in 91. And so when the university started getting into the technology stuff, I set up the labs, and that's when I kind of got hooked into it. And I went back, got a second degree in computer science, which is what they called software development back then. Um, and kind of stayed in that area and just grew through that. So
Yeah. And Rick, me and you will be seeing each other at Rails World in Toronto in just about 2 weeks now.
yeah, certainly. And then we'll see you again in October. I hope to get
Indeed.
the training going.
Yeah. So me and Rick have known each other for many years at this point.
Mhm.
And we've done some work together and we'll be doing some more work together in October. And then James, obviously you and I got to meet at Sin City Ruby in the spring. So
Mhm.
that was nice. The rest of you guys I have not met in person, at least not yet. Um, Charlie, how about you? Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Charlie and I work at Lumen Learning. I live in Portland, Oregon. I'm a backend software engineer. We do Ruby Rails projects as well as some PHP projects. I moved to Oregon in 2017, career changer. I was previously doing um, I was in tech, doing policy enforcement, customer support, um, intellectual property rights enforcement. And yeah, I helped to volunteer at an event to teach some fifth to eighth grade girls to code and decided that that's what I wanted to do for a career. So I came and did a boot camp here in Oregon and decided to move here and got my first job. So
Nice. And where did you live before Oregon?
Utah in Salt
Oh,
Lake.
okay. I lived in Salt Lake for about 2 years when I was a kid.
Nice.
Um, okay. Evie, how about you?
Um, well, I would say relatively new to programming. I guess let's just start where okay, Ebenechi, I live in Saskatchewan, Canada. relatively new to programming. I've been working as a software tester. I started with manual testing, then progressed into automated testing, which is how I got like our stack is Ruby, which is how I got to find your blog.
Mm-hmm.
So decided to transition into software engineering proper. So did a boot camp as well. I recently graduated from the boot camp, so just I guess trying to learn more about software, I guess, and testing essentially.
Yeah, great. Well, glad to have you here. Glad to have everybody here. By the way, I need to go grab something from across the room. Andrew, I'll let you go next. And I already know you, so I don't need to hear you introduce yourself. I'll be right back.
Hey guys, my name's Andrew. I'm a software developer in Calgary, Alberta. I work for a real estate software company in Toronto, and stack is pretty much all Ruby on Rails, and we're transitioning our React to Hotwire, and that's about it. I've been relief fired before, and it's quite the sensation. How am I going to eat? Oh, I'm so happy I don't need to work there anymore. But
Well, I have the added benefit of I can actually retire and be okay. So it's
nice.
like,
That must have been an amazing
it-
feeling.
yeah, it was like, why am I putting up with this BS?
Yeah, I had a similar thing happen a year or two ago. I wasn't exactly fired, but the job ended and it was kind of like, thank God. Okay, Dimitro. I guess you joined midway. We were just going around and as you probably picked up, just doing intros, saying our name and where we're from and stuff.
Hey, yes, my name is Mitra. I joined your Zoom meeting a few times before,
Mm-hmm.
and I felt like I didn't have enough Zoom today. So here we are. I live in Toronto. I work in a startup that was acquired by Workday, and we are a Ruby shop within this huge enterprise, doing our Ruby thing.
Nice.
Yeah.
I'm
I'm sure
curious. Are you an island of Ruby within Workday, or
Yep.
did they have? Yeah.
Pretty much. Yep.
Got it. And Demetrio, are you going to be at Rails World since you're in Toronto?
Yep.
Nice.
Nice.
Well, I'll see you there. Yeah, and I wanted to share with you guys. Some of you are aware of this, I'm sure, but I'm working on a book called Professional Rails Testing. It's the successor to the book that's out now called The Complete Guide to Rails Testing. But
Is that the final cover design?
sorry?
Is that the final cover design?
It might be, but I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah. Why do you
Not
ask?
for resale?
No, yeah, this is a proof copy. Yeah, but I think it's almost done. I'll rattle off some of the table of contents real quick because I'm really excited about what's in this. I'll just list the first few of them real quick. Chapter 1, well, technically chapter 2 because there's an introduction. But chapter 2, tests as specifications. Chapter 3, test-driven development. Chapter 4, writing meaningful tests. Chapter 5, writing understandable tests. And those are two of the most important chapters in the book. How to write meaningful tests and how to write understandable tests. Because as some of you guys know, I work as a consultant, and so I get to see a lot of different test suites. And a lot of places, even though they have tests, the tests are maybe not very meaningful. And maybe that's what we can talk about this evening, since we have no other specific plans, is meaningful tests and maybe understandable tests. Do you guys have an idea of what I might mean when I say meaningful tests? Can you imagine what it might mean for a test to be not meaningful?
I would have to say a not meaningful test is it passes and you don't know what the hell it did, and you're just like, oh, it's green.
Okay. That's
Yeah,
one
you-
possibility.
Or the code changes and the test still passes when you thought maybe it shouldn't anymore.
Yeah.
That's my test suite.
Green.
There is an opposite to that, is when the code changes a little and without the output change, but the test fails, and you need to
Mm.
update it every time. Like it tests the actual code, not the logic.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and that hits close to what that chapter is about, Dimitro, the meaningful test chapter. So kind of the main thing I talk about in the meaningful test chapter is means versus ends. And I use a couple analogies. Oh, I wish I had a printout right next to me because I had one earlier, but I use an analogy of a stapler. And like, let's say you wanted to test the stapler to see if it works or it meets its specifications or whatever. One way is you could ask yourself, does this stapler have all the right parts? Or another way is you could just use the stapler to actually staple something and ask, are these pages stapled together? So like the parts of the machine are the means to an end, but the actual end goal is to staple some papers together. But a lot of Rails tests that I see are the equivalent of like checking to see if the parts of the machine are there, not trying to use the stapler and asserting that it works. So that's part of meaningful tests. Let me consult my own book and see what else I wrote about this.
I mean, you can have a not meaningful test that basically just asserts that 1 equals 1 or true equals true. Like it
Exactly.
doesn't necessarily mean that you're getting any meaning out of it.
Yeah, I call those tautological tests. Like I saw a test some months ago where somebody was testing some code that involved an API endpoint, and he stubbed the response of the API and then called it and then asserted that the API's response equaled the same thing that the stub was. It's like, well, you're not testing anything. All you did was stub the thing and then turn around and assert that the response that you just stubbed matches what you just stubbed. It's
You just tested your test,
exactly.
essentially.
Yeah, exactly. And if the code were to change, the test would still pass. So those are not meaningful. Something else that I included in this chapter, which is a really common question, is how to decide what kinds of tests to write. And I'm curious if we can just go around again. I'm curious to get a feel for where people are at. If you had to rate your comfort level with testing on a scale of 1 to 10, where would you say you're at right now? And if you want to decline to say, that's fine too. But James, where would you say you're at in terms of comfort with testing?
Well, of the technologies that I'm familiar with, I'm very comfortable with testing them in different ways and different levels. So, I'm not like the Rails expert. So maybe in certain things that's covered in your book, these different levels probably implies some Railsy specific things, I'm guessing. But I'm very comfortable with testing.
Okay. And then Rick, obviously we know each other and I kind of have a feel for where you're at, but how would you assess yourself?
I'd have to assess myself as probably like a mid, like a 5.
Okay.
And mainly the team that we've kind of brought into being over the last 3 or 4 years has had very different levels of experience.
Mm-hmm.
All of us started out just with like 0 and have learned, as you know, through our relation, have learned how to pick it up. Some of us are fighting it, thinking why test, and the others are we know how to test. We just have to learn how to do it right. So, but I think I'm at about
Okay.
5 level now. And I've been seriously forcing myself, especially on my last project, to definitely do all the test-driven development versus test after development,
Mhm.
which seems to be the tradition at the U.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Charlie, how about you?
I would say comfort level. I feel pretty comfortable writing different levels of tests. Mostly my experiences in like unit testing, a little bit of integration testing. And yeah, so like scale of 1 to 10, probably like a 7. Just I do have the bad habit, I would say, of doing the tests after I've started developing, because it's really difficult for me to come up with like an expected output before I start writing the algorithm that I'm writing.
I'm curious, why do you call that a bad habit?
Just because I feel like it's better practice to do sort of like test-driven development. I don't know.
It could be argued that that's a little bit circular. But I wanted to focus on that for a second, because a lot of people are interested in learning like how to do testing correctly. But to me, there's no such thing as doing correctly. There's only advantageous or not advantageous. That's not to say there aren't worse and better ways, because there certainly are. But I really hate for people to get an idea of like, there's a lot of like guilt around testing, you know? And the funny thing is, everybody thinks they're below average, but I'm here to tell you that the average is shit. And so if you think you're below average, you're probably not. But yeah, one of the things that I definitely try really hard to do in my book is to provide reasoning for every single piece of advice. Like there's nothing at all that I say that you should do without giving a reason. And in fact, I don't really say like you should do such and such. It's more like, if you do this, it has this positive consequence, or if you do this, it has this negative consequence, that kind of thing. Anyway, let's keep moving. Evie, how about you? What's your comfort level?
Well, I'm not very comfortable because I'm still really learning basically. So yeah, I'm very excited when my test passes. I'm frustrated when it doesn't pass on the next run, or it just doesn't work the way it should, that kind of thing. So
Okay.
yeah, I'm not. If I had to rate myself, I'll be like I don't know, 3.
Okay.
That thrill of your test passing is never going to go away. It's always a thrill when your test pass.
Yeah, I'd say that's true.
Yeah.
How about you, Andrew?
I'd say I'm a 5 or 6.
Okay.
When I met you, I was like 0.
Ha.
And then I worked at companies that cared about testing, and I basically had to shape up or ship out.
Uh-huh.
And the biggest improvement for me was just moving to mini test from RSpec. I
Interesting.
just thought RSpec was just, I just find RSpec garbage in terms of learning it. I think it just throws up every possible roadblock possible to stop people from wanting to test. I think that's I'd say in the Ruby community, I would go to say that RSpec is the reason testing sucks in the Ruby community. As soon as I moved to mini test, it's just like you just write in Ruby all the time, and your Ruby gets better by writing in mini test because mini test is in Ruby, and you're not learning, language that's invented by the RSpec, authors. But I found a very interesting testing experience I ran into is I picked up a side project of a Rails project, and the developer must have been, I think it was his first Rails project, and he made like every mistake in the book.
Oh
It
no.
was like in the view, like data was being loaded in the views, a lot of stuff was being done in the views, there were no helpers, you have huge like algorithms all in the views. Like a controller action would handle like 4 or 5 pages. And it was just a big spaghetti mess. However, and I don't know how he pulled this off, but every single feature was feature tested. Like every single feature. It's been 500, more than 500 feature tests.
Oh wow.
More feature tests than the company I work for don't even have that many feature tests. And he even put all the feature tests in the controller tests folder. Like this is just how a mess it was. And the factories made no sense at all. Like it's a flooring company, and he made all the factories, all these media companies that he was related to. And so it was just a big jumbled mess. But if I ran that test suite and I made a change, I knew 99% convincing that my changes were working. Just
That is
because
a fascinating scenario.
the feature tests were just so solid, and he clicked through, and he started from the beginning on all of them. They're very long and very wieldy, but started from the beginning, logged in, clicked through, and then asserted the changes and everything like that. And I was so confident that with his tests that I just did huge sweeping refactors of it on a like a weekly basis. I was just like pumping out the changes. Me and ChatGTP were just like hammering out code, and it's been solid. And now that's really kind of flipped the script for me just on how important it is, or how much of a lifesaver. Like I wouldn't have touched the project if it didn't have that kind of testing suite. It'd just be no absolute way, because everything was just a jumbled mess, and you don't know if you fix something here, is it going to break something there. And his test suite basically saved the project from me having to start from scratch. So that was pretty crazy. That's really kind of made me want to focus more on testing and improve testing, even though I cussed his name out how many times I was fixing his code and trying to figure stuff out. And but a really strong suite will just save you when you are on a deadline or something like that, and get stuff done.
Yeah, so you must have really mixed feelings toward the guy. You want to like go and slap him around and be like, fuck you, but then also be like, great job, give him a hug.
I'm curious, I have a question. When you made changes to the code, did it break a lot of tests and you didn't know why? Like they were unexpectedly broken?
No, I would break the code sometimes. Like they had some pretty crazy search filters, and the search filters were built out where a field that you type in could search multiple different columns, one of those wild card kind of search columns. But I would just turn off headless, and I just video record it, and it'd go through the whole situation, and it would show you what the result was and what I was expecting. And whenever it broke, I knew why it broke.
Nice. Yeah, at first when you described the situation, I thought, oh, even though they're comprehensive, I wonder if they're brittle, easily broken and connected to the code in weird ways. But it sounds like this guy must have been a testing savant.
Yeah, I know.
And maybe not so great of a Rails
definitely-
developer at first, anyway.
Yeah, it was really crazy. It was just such a huge help, and nothing I'd ever, or if I didn't understand it, I was able to figure out kind of pretty quickly just because of the, it's almost sold me on just doing feature tests. Like it's really, because before that, I love doing controller tests, and just because they're fast. But I think I remember DHH did a talk on testing, and he said on Basecamp they had a feature where they had an incident where a client lost some data, and the feature that they were using was really well tested, but only in parts. And he said there was no encompassing test from beginning to end on the feature, and they lost a customer lost data because of that. So that's really kind of the problem. Is where I work right now is they don't like feature tests, I guess, because it's very slow running.
I want to
Right.
talk about that. First, I want to make sure Dimitro has a chance to go. Dimitro, where would you place yourself right now?
I feel very comfortable writing tests. I don't feel super comfortable in deciding which tests are worth writing. I would over test everything and throw a system test on top of that, and then the end-to-end just to make sure.
Yeah.
I do like the story about the browser and the disabling headless mode. That I love those tests more than anything, just because they're visual and they're super easy to reproduce, and they do ensure that the feature works, not just the pieces. And but they are slow. And so this is a constant fight between which ones to write.
I just
Yeah.
heard that feature tests were flaky, but in that situation, the tests were not flaky at all, as long as you had your elements properly set up. Like especially
Yep.
when you're going through table rows or something like that, you have to make sure that the feature test can easily find like a table row or something like that.
Yeah, so something I wanted to bring up is, and part of the reason why I asked you guys comfort level with testing is, how do you decide when you're building any particular feature, how do you decide what kinds of tests to write? Like if you're choosing among, I'm going to use RSpec terminology because that's what I mainly work with, model specs, request specs, system specs. How do you decide? Dimitro, you kind of alluded to that a second ago. But James, I'll ask you, since you're in general quite comfortable with testing, like, do you have a feeling on how you decide at what level to test and how much of each kind and stuff like that?
I usually try to describe the feature first using some high-level tests, and I've used either RSpec or Cucumber. Sometimes I find Cucumber just has a better, like it feels like at a higher level, like way disconnected from the code at all. Whereas I feel like RSpec, again, I'm not a Rails super expert or anything, so I haven't done a lot of Rails testing, very little in fact. But I like to write some of the high level tests first, particularly like MVP kind of tests, or back in the olden days, I think we called these like architectural, what do we call them? Like they were like proof of concept for your overall design of the whole product. And so you'd want something that's like a few of these feature level tests that kind of go deep into the system. And so I would want to choose a smattering of feature tests as we go. And then I generally do unit testing like at a very low level to close to 100% coverage, because I feel like that makes me more confident in the feature level tests. So in the feature level tests, I don't really worry about like line coverage at all. I just worry about hitting what I think are the most important flows of the application.
Yeah, that's very close to the way I think about it.
Which is a real art, honestly, to decide that, because you're not being comprehensive. So what's the right answer? I don't know. If your users don't ever hit upon a flow that goes wrong, I guess you did it right.
Mm. Yeah, these are the exact things that I'm trying to help people take from a like gut feel judgment call type thing to having very specific heuristics and ways of thinking about these things. Like with let's say model specs versus feature specs or system specs. Let's actually simplify it a little bit more. Let's imagine a world where we only have two kinds of tests: unit tests and system tests. So for purposes of this discussion, we'll define unit tests as well, we'll go in the other direction. First, we'll define system tests as tests that exercise the entire stack, all the way from the browser, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, all that stuff, all the way down to the database and the OS level. So system tests exercise the entire stack. And then unit tests, that is a term without an agreed upon definition in the software industry. So, and it doesn't matter exactly how we want to define that right now, but like unit tests, we can call it like, if you have a test that only exercise some Ruby code, like no database, no, not even any Rails or anything like that. Like let's forget about Rails right now. It doesn't even have to be Ruby. It could be Ruby or Python or Java or whatever. Let's define unit tests as just tests that exercise the Ruby or Java or whatever it is, but no framework, no database, no browser, none of that stuff. What are the relative costs and benefits of system tests versus unit tests? I will
So
call
that's-
on, oh wait, somebody started to say
I was
something.
just gonna say for unit tests, the benefits are you're able to very quickly detect anytime some like behavior changes.
Mhm.
Like when you update code, when you refactor, etc. If you have the more coverage that you have on unit tests, then the easier it is to detect those changes.
Do you mean because unit tests are fast to run, or a different reason?
Because they are smaller units of tests. So like so they can test, I guess, all the small different ways that the system could change in behavior based on each of the like particular methods or whatnot.
Yeah, so maybe you get a finer detection. They're more sensitive.
Yes.
They're usually more comprehensive as well.
Okay.
Because
yeah,
they're
so
lightweight to write.
yes.
think.
Okay, so let's keep track of what we have here. So I'm going to use the word inexpensive. They're inexpensive to write. And as you said, Charlie, they can give you fine-grained feedback. What else? There's at least one more I'm thinking of. They're cheap to write and they are cheap to
Run.
Yeah. Yeah, those are the main two that, well, those are the two that I list in my book. Unit tests are cheap to write and cheap to run. Now, what are some of the costs or downsides of unit tests?
Well, they don't test things in an integrated way, which your system always has to run in an integrated way. So you need to have something above that level to make sure that things are fitting together correctly.
Yeah. Yeah, if you had 100% unit test coverage, but no system tests, you could delete all your HTML and still have a 100% passing test suite even though your application wouldn't even begin to work. So that's exactly right. And now let's focus on system tests. What are the costs and benefits, pros and cons of those?
They're definitely slow to run.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know necessarily that they're as big of a problem in writing them. They seem to be like, given the right framework, you can write them pretty quickly.
Speak for
I
yourself.
think they might be even easier to write sometimes when, yeah, well, sometimes with unit tests, you need to, well, depending on the code base, you need to think about the mocking out the parts that are out of scope for this particular unit that you are testing. And with,
That was exactly my thought on why
Yeah.
I thought it might be like not so hard to write the system level tests. It's like
Yep.
you usually poke around at the interface and see the result, and that's that. There's not, I mean, I think if you're able to run your whole system, then it's pretty easy. If you can't run your whole system and you have to mock out certain parts of it, then it becomes the same kind of problem, but at a bigger level.
I think it also depends though on how interactive your user interface is. Like if you're using Hotwire and you got stuff disappearing and appearing all over the screen or loading async, I find I get a little worried. Like we've got one kid on our team who's just like a superstar, and in terms of like JavaScript and testing and Hotwire, and I see him write like a pile of system tests, and we had to disable them just because they were so flaky. And that's the always kind of thing in the back of my mind when I'm running a system test. It's like, oh, is this thing going to flake out when we throw it up? And after all, and you know, watching out for, you know, is you know, if stuff's loading and making sure you got the right IDs on everything so you can, you know, select it and make sure, you know, it's the right value and everything like that. Obviously with my experience with this project, I'm going to push forward ahead with it, even though it's kind of frowned upon at where I work just because of the speed of it. But I'm, you know, after my experience, I'm a pretty firm believer with the feature tests. But I feel there are some obstacles if you've got a UI and, you know, stuff's kind of flying all over the place.
Yeah. Somebody
So
said,
would it be fair to say that they're easy to write but very expensive to maintain?
Right.
I was kind of thinking that. Yeah. I was going to say, like somebody said, it depends on the project, and that's definitely true. Like I've worked on projects where there's like a million JavaScript libraries and CSS frameworks and stuff, and some of them are like old and janky, and the UI is like has tons of asynchronicity and pop-ups, and it's super janky too. And like that stuff can be really time consuming to figure out how to get a test to manipulate the crazy UI to do what it needs to do. And that's not the fault of system tests. That's the fault of designing your UI in such an over-engineered way. But I think that's kind of the experience that I'm drawing from when I say that I feel like system tests are expensive to write. But hearing you guys talk, I'm realizing that sometimes that's the case, but sometimes it's not the case.
I would say that for sure. And maybe sometimes what you can implement is ahead of on the technology curve of how you can test that implementation, like a lot of this dynamic stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Does it also mean that if it's hard to write the system test, then the users will struggle with the UI, and that's a bad sign, and you need to fix it?
I think so. Yeah, this is a whole different can of worms, but like,
Yeah.
testing and code design are like inextricably interdependent. You know, like if you have an application, if you have a code base that is just like a muddy pile of shit, then it's like not really possible to put neat and tidy tests on it because the application code influences the tests. And I'm speaking like mainly in terms of like domain concepts. In my experience, okay, with every single one of my clients who has hired me for help with testing, literally every single one of them, when we look at the app, the biggest problem, in addition to testing, is that they have we might call a corrupt conceptual model to their application. Like, for example, there's a model, I'm just making this up, but there's a model called guitar. But then the business changes and now they sell keyboards and drum sets too. But they didn't change the code. And so now there's things that are called a guitar, but it's really a keyboard, or things that are called a guitar, but it's really a drum set. But in some places it's called a drum set. In some places it's called a guitar. And so it's just conceptually corrupt. And how can you put neat and tidy tests on that? You can't, because the tests are a reflection of the ideas in the code base. And if the ideas in the code base are corrupt, then the tests are going to be corrupt also. I forget what put me on that tangent or where I was, but we were talking about costs and benefits of unit tests versus system tests. So even though we might not all be in agreement, I'm going to say that in my opinion, system tests tend to be expensive to write. And I think we do agree that system tests tend to be expensive to run, especially if you include the total cost of ownership, including keeping on top of flaky tests and stuff like that. So how do you decide when to do each? To me, it's a cost benefit type thing. I will maybe write a few tests at the system level, like a smoke test type thing. And smoke test means like, is it horribly broken or is it not? Like when you turn on the device, does it emit smoke is the analogy. So I'll do that, maybe have a system test for the happy path and then maybe one error case or something like that, but just a couple system tests. But I'm not going to cover all the possible permutations through that behavior with system tests, because the vast majority of it is going to be the same, and it's going to be not particularly relevant to the part of the behavior I'm interested in, and it's going to be expensive. So I don't want to invoke all that overhead of the system test for every single permutation through the behavior. I'd rather drop down a level and say, okay, we have a couple coarse-grained system tests that tell us it's not horribly broken. Now let's take all those permutations and write some cheap unit tests for all those. That's kind of the mix that I shoot for. James, any thought on that? Do you think of it a similar way or different?
No, I think of it just like that. Have you read the RSpec book? I think it's
If I
called
did,
the
I don't
RSpec book.
remember.
Yeah, well, the funny thing about the RSpec book is that it's really a book about Cucumber
Oh, okay.
and RSpec, using Cucumber and RSpec at the same time to do exactly what you just said, which is to write tests at a high level and then drop down into the low level as you implement like whatever feature you're working on, and doing things in a test driven way, that way to drive from a high level down to low level. You have your high level tests, you build out things at a high level, and then you drop down to like the unit test level and work with RSpec in that example. You could work with anything, of course. But and again, just like I was saying, very comprehensive on the unit testing part of it, and less so at the feature level testing part of it.
Yeah, you know what? I'm realizing something right now. And by the way, if that's the one that's like co-authored by Zach Dennis, then I definitely did read that book, but many years ago. It's I think that's the same concept of like outside in testing from that book, Growing Object Oriented Software Guided by Tests.
Oh yeah. Except
Yeah,
with like 1,000 less pages.
yeah, yeah.
This is the one I'm thinking of is effective testing with RSpec 3.
Okay. Yeah, that rings a bell for sure. But this idea of outside in testing, when I first read about this, and even up until this conversation right now, I thought of that as like every feature is kind of apples to apples. And with every feature, you can write some system tests to cover that coarse grained behavior and then drop down to the unit level and cover the permutations. But I think what I experience more in reality is there's like two kinds of features. There's like straightforward CRUD functionality kind of features where I will write a system spec and little more. Like I might write, you know, for a CRUD feature, I might write a system spec for creation and editing a record and not much else. No model specs or anything for that kind of thing. But then if I need to do something, I need to make a change to something more involved at the model level, that'll usually be like just model specs and no feature specs because it's like all that like low level nuts and bolts kind of stuff as opposed to UI type stuff. But I didn't even have that realization until right now.
Correction. The book I was thinking of is actually called the RSpec book.
Oh, okay.
Behavior driven development with RSpec, Cucumber, and friends.
Oh, okay.
But basically it's like I said, it does this like in what do they call it? Outside in kind of design using testing. So it's
Mhm.
test driven design.
Okay. Yeah, and I myself struggled with that when I first encountered it. If I evaluate my test writing habits currently, I don't know how closely they would match that or not. Definitely pretty closely sometimes, and then other times not. But I think a lot of times, you know, a lot of times people suffer from writer's block when they try to write tests. Do you guys ever feel like that? You're kind of looking at a blank file and you're like, all right, I want to write a test, but I'm not sure what to put here. I think a
It's
lot of
because
times,
you're not
Uh-huh.
writing a test. You're designing something. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Oh, well, it's like you're starting with a blank file. What's going to go in that file? You got to figure out how this thing, what's the shape, what's the interface, how's it going to work? And so that's like you're really doing design work, not testing.
Exactly. Yeah, it's almost going to like a blank concrete pad or something with a bunch of lumber and tools and being like, I'm gonna start building, but what do I put here? Like it's just it's not gonna work. Yeah, and there's a
Yeah,
question I come across sometimes, which is like, how do I write tests if I'm not given clear requirements? And the answer is that you can't. Not only can you not write tests, but you can't build like how would you build anything at all if you don't know what you're going to build yet?
right. Sometimes though the tests can help clarify what the requirements are.
Right.
If you treat it as like a bit of a two-way street with the person who's giving you those requirements. I remember we
Yeah.
had this conversation in one of your meetings a few months ago.
Okay. Yeah, and this is such an important topic that I made that my first chapter of my book, Tests as Specifications, because to me it's like a continuous flow of deciding the requirements and then turning those requirements into tests. Or let's instead use the word specifications, deciding your specifications for what you're going to build and then turning those specifications that are, you know, written in notes or something like that, turning those into executable specifications. And I think that is a big mindset shift. The the aim of testing is not to ask the question like, did it work? But does it meet the specifications? It's not about verification, it's about specification, which is like a subtle thing. And I've struggled so many times to try to like explain it. Because it's just such a subtle thing. But I think once you make that shift, a lot of things look a lot different.
Have you seen the RSpec course taught by Xavier Shea?
No.
What was it? On Pluralsight.
Okay. Xavier Shea, is that spelled the French way that I would expect?
Yeah, I didn't realize at the time, but I think he's the engineering director at Square.
Oh, interesting.
And, yeah, he's pretty heavy hitter.
Did you throw a link into the chat?
Yeah, I think I found his course here. Let me where's the chat here?
Oh, it's making me create an account to see this.
Yeah, it's a little. I don't like Pluralsight for that, but yeah, it's I'm gonna go through that course again. It was just it got way over my head real fast when I first started taking that course. I think about 5 years ago. I think I'm gonna try it again, see if I'm at a little bit better at it. But he kind of took it to a new level.
Okay. Do you know? Okay, so that link like didn't work for me because I don't have a Pluralsight account.
Yeah, you'll need to get an account to look it up, unfortunately.
Oh, and okay, I was gonna ask this for the guy's name there. I got nowhere close to his spelling of his name. Okay, great. I'll look at that later. Yeah. Yeah, so test says specifications. I think that's a really important idea.
When you say unit tests, are you including controller tests in that?
Oh, no, I wasn't even trying to make a connection between real Rails tests and this fictional parallel universe where there's only system tests and unit tests. I just did that because like there's so much baggage around the different kinds of Rails tests, and it's like, what's a controller test versus a request spec and stuff like that, and I didn't want to get into all that, so I just did the two. But it's kind of it's similar. It's like just a spectrum of costs and benefits. Like request specs are a little more costly than model specs, I'd say, but less costly than system specs. And so if there's a scenario where the UI stuff doesn't matter, I really am just targeting the controller behavior, then I'll write a request spec, or rather I'll write like a number of request specs. Because again, I don't want to invoke that overhead of a system spec every single time I need to test one of those permutations when the UI doesn't matter.
I think that's what I've disliked most about moving from a React front end to Hotwire. With React, you could do a controller test, and because React is basically hitting your API, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you can easily see the data that's coming back from an API that React is going to hit. But now, unfortunately, with this Hotwire crap, you're getting the whole HTML document and you can't verify the data that's coming back. And I forget what the mini test version was it, but the mini test had a function for the reading the instance variable data that came back, and that got, unfortunately, what's it called when they? Sorry, I'm on my second.
Deprecated. I'm on my third glass of whiskey, so maybe it's not so great anymore. It got deprecated, and so as soon as something gets deprecated, we're not allowed to use it at our company anymore. Mm-hmm.
And it was very useful, though, to tell what data was coming back from the controller. But that was gone, and now we have to basically rely on making sure your data is wrapped in a div with an ID that you can track, or, you know, a class you can track or something like that. That's why I really liked, I kind of got used to React, even though obviously it has its own issues, but testing the data coming back for React was very easy to do. And even debugging, you know, looking in the network tab and checking out the data coming back. And now with this Hotwire, which is great, but unfortunately now you got all this crap coming through, and I gotta basically copy it out, paste it in the ChatGPT and say, hey, how do I get this data out of it? And it'll give me the right selector, and then I'll know what to use for my test, but it's still pretty messy.
Interesting. Yeah, to me, that touches on like the ins versus means thing. Like, to me, making assertions on the instance variables that get set, to me, that seems like testing means rather than ins. But then also, if you're having, like, I think one of the desirable qualities of a test is that it should be convenient to write, or like a desirable quality of a system is that tests should be convenient to write for it. And if things are structured in such a way that you have to paste code into ChatGPT and be like, how do I get my hands on this DOM element? Then I feel like I'd probably feel myself wanting to restructure something to make that test more convenient, which, you know, it sounds like that's like already there and that's just kind of handed to you as what you get. Maybe you don't have control over that part.
But I've never really run into a situation, even with, you know, everything that can happen on the front end, where you have an instance variable which had some data, that data didn't end up on the front end. I mean, you get, you know, say, you know, customers, and you're looping through customers. It's not like 9 out of 10 customers are not going to show up for some reason, right? I find whatever you got in that instance variable is going to show up on the front end, unless you got some crazy UI that's like hiding stuff or something like that. But
Yeah. For that, I probably wouldn't even write a test at all. Okay, well, it is a bit after the hour, so we probably should wrap up soon. Just a little bit more self-promotion before we go. The book, ladies and gentlemen, is called Professional Rails Testing. It should be out sometime between now, which is September 2024, and the beginning of 2025. And if you go
Is
to
it available for purchase in like a beta form, like some sites do?
Not yet. I need to tie up a few more loose ends, but I'll be bringing some, well, I think maybe you won't be there, James, but I'll be bringing some to Rails World to hand out as gifts. But if you really want one, James, I have your address. I can send it to you.
I'm happy to pay as well, because I want to support your work.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. It's $1,000.
Well, wait a minute.
It's a really good book.
Totally worth it.
Yeah, and I'll mention one more thing before we go. The kind of stuff we've talked about today, testing and stuff. I do this kind of stuff for a living. I work as a consultant, and companies hire me. Well, Rick, your workplace hired me to come in and do this kind of stuff. Often it takes the format of like, we'll meet once a week for some period of months or something like that, and either just talk about high level stuff, like, for example, how do you decide when to write a model spec versus a system spec? And then quite often we'll actually look at code together. I was looking at some tests with a client the other day, and they just said, like, let's look at this test. What seems good? What seems bad? And we discussed that for a while and made some adjustments and stuff like that. And so, dear viewer, on YouTube, if you're interested in finding out more about my consulting, you can go to codewithjason.com, and there's a consulting page there with more info and contact info and stuff like that. Feel free to get in touch. Thank you everyone for coming, and I'll see you next time.
See you.